Hey guys, what's cracking? Gutsman here, coming at you with another tier list video. It's been a while since we've done one of this, but we decided to go ahead and do a tier list on V-Series, and I do mean we because we got a co-host for this one. Say hi, David.
Hello.
So V-Series has basically been thrown into the can. It's a side event now, if you can believe it. And because of that, we're basically in a capsule format, right? A time capsule format, to be specific. So we decided we would corroborate together and come up with where all the clans place in the forever meta that is V-Series. The boy David here has been particularly interested in this topic, and he actually knows a little bit more about it than I do, if anything, so I had to bring him on for this one. So we're gonna have a hearty old talk about where the clans go and why V-Series does not end off on the greatest competitive scene ever. So if you are trying to go to those side events for this year's BCS season, then do pay attention to what we talk about in this video, because it will definitely become relevant when you go over there. At least I think, if they're trying to still try hard for side event. I mean, I guess if people will, bring Shiranui to locals still, then, they'll bring Gurgit over to freaking the side event for V-Series. Speaking of which, let's start off with that. Gurgit is the best deck in the format.
Yeah, so Gurgit has a lot of things going for it, but the biggest thing that Gurgit has going for it is speed. The amount, how wide the deck can go as quickly as it can go is pretty crazy. Not many decks can create this many attacks as fast as it does, and we're talking about cards like Two-Door, and specifically Two-Door is the big thing that really made this deck super powerful, because it offers multi-attack, but it also offers consistency to your Ezel engine, something we really didn't have before. Being able to pitch that during the ride phase to go and help fix your ride up with the Ezel, making Gurgit actually quite a bit faster. Being able to go up to Ezel on turn 2 and then Gurgit on turn 3. We saw a lot of lists, opting not to play Ezel at first, but later the more people started playing Ezel, because as it turns out, a faster Gurgit is the only way to beat Gurgit.
Gotta go fast. Yeah. But and like, one thing to note, right? Because if you'll notice, we're doing clan symbols here, and we wanted to throw Gurgit up here right away and all of Gold Paladin, because it kind of sets a standard. Because Gurgit, in addition to being the BDAF of the format, like, irrevocably, right, there's no denying that this guy is the best. He more than triples the top numbers of the next best deck. One thing to note is Gold Paladin in general is just kind of a cracked clan, right? That's another one of the reasons why it's so easy to justify it as a whole being up here, because Percival being a generic piece, really strong. Two-Door being the best ride fixer of all the ride fixers that we got for the wave that came after Clan Collections. We have multiple decks and other engines that are really viable. Like Spectral Duke is also a pretty strong deck. Like, if Gurgit suddenly went down, that would still be really good. We have, of course, the Ezel engine. You brought it before. Ezel makes everything faster, way faster. So this clan is just overall stacked, and Gurgit represents the pinnacle. And also, another thing, this is an Excel Hell meta. We're going to talk about a lot of Excel decks, and a lot of Excel decks are really strong here, and this is the best Excel deck that has ever existed. No Excel deck has ever been able to top this one. I mean, you could debate the tier 0 formats with Anger Blader, but I think even then Gurgit just overall just supersedes everything. So this is the gold standard. The rest of these rankings we're going to try and throw in terms of the pure merit of their respective clans, what they can do. But note that because of Gurgit, everything in good and below is not meta. It cannot compete in this format, because this is just going to Dougie on them. I just want to throw that out of the way there ahead of time, so everyone knows how we're going to rank these, right? So individual clan merit, but keep in mind, this is the cutoff bar. There is the ones that can fight Gurgit, and then the ones who cannot fight Gurgit, period.
Yep. And that's really what I just want a quick correction. Percival is banned in V,
right?
But it is legal in premium. But so Gold Paladins don't have access to that, but Gold Paladins have a significant amount of tools available to them. One thing to keep in mind with Golds is the most consistent Excel deck that's ever existed, and that is mostly because you have so many cards that peep the top X number of cards to call stuff. This is things like Canarius, Gurgit himself. and then Tudor, who we've already mentioned, Tudor being one of absolutely the best ride fixer in the game. It's just 2 extra attacks. It's just so ridiculous off of 1 CB. So yeah, it's a deck that goes really wide. It's really, really fast, and it's really hard to kind of get the one up on it. And what you're going to find when you look down this list is the decks that can compete with it are decks that can farm up resources early so they can actually survive, but then they also have really powerful win conditions that allow them to close the game. Gurgit doesn't need to build a big hand because it can kill you really fast, or it can rely on its defensive ability as well. So it just kind of has a little too much going for it, and that's why it has over 50 top 8 appearances in all regions for the most recent Bushiroad Spring Fest spring tournament, right? So the second best deck for reference has barely over 10.
Yeah, it's effectively tier 0 format type of stats, right? And just to add on to your correction earlier, when I say Percival, I don't mean Percival in the current format. I mean like in the Legacy of Golds, right? Because like this deck just in general has always been stomping things when it comes to being the Excel deck, the premier Excel deck of the format, right? It felt like that for most of the formats, really, because you had like varying levels. Like Ezel really kicked it off, and Gurgit like brings it home, and Duke was there in the middle, man, right? Back when like Percival wasn't with Gurgit, but was accessible to the rest of the format there. But these days, right, we don't even really need Percival because in addition to Ezel package, which can get you an Excel early, you also have access to the Holy Shine if you wanted to take it that route. Holy Shine's another way of doing it. But yeah, we've talked enough about Gurgit there. It just goes to show that this sets the gold standard, pun intended. Now moving down to the can compete in the format, we're just going to do it by rows here, just to keep it from suspense. Unless, would you rather do it by like clan here?
Let's do it by clan. We needed to start with Gurgit because Gurgit is the best deck, and every other deck we're about to point out, we're yes going to evaluate as a clan, but it really, like Josh said, we are going to be evaluating it directly against Gurgit and if it's viable against Gurgit.
Right. In case in point. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's kind of just what the format goes right now. And that's, just as you were just about to say, I'm sure, Royal Paladin is up there because of Majesty Board Blaster.
Not too long ago, it was Jewel Knights, but then the Fire Nation came, and it ended up being MLB or GG, because MLB is the most Excel, hell, hate kind of card there is. But tell me why this is going to be at the bottom of this tier eventually.
So realistically, MLB doesn't generate a lot of hand. It doesn't really farm a lot of cards. It doesn't have a lot of shield. So if Gurgit gets the jump on it, it might just be screwed, to be honest with you. Despite the fact that it has a really good Excel matchup, the other bad part about it is Gurgit, again, as we've said many times on this channel, Gurgit fixes the issue that Excels have, which is that they can go super wide, sure, but they don't have the numbers. Well, Gurgit fixes that problem. Yep. So it doesn't really matter that MLB has a higher base stat. I think MLB can win against Gurgit, especially if it goes first. So I think that MLB deserves to be where it is, but I want to preface this and say that MLB probably loses to every other deck that is in this tier.
Right, and one thing to note about MLB is in exchange for having the opportunity to be able to outclass the Excel by being able to go first and have that 18k base while they're not able to scale up properly, it should be noted that against the Force and Protect decks, you feel like you're hardly playing a deck worth playing because your main benefit just doesn't really register on the scale for them. We've actually, and again, to even mention that, this doesn't mean it's an auto win against Excel, because then it would actually be like in the top of this rung. It would be like the biggest proponent against this. Me and David have actually played this matchup, and I still felt like Gurgit was the better deck, and I had the most hate card. Well, we're going to talk about another hate card, but Narukami later. But I had one of the most hate cards ever against this thing, and it still can stop it. So that's what we're really talking about here. You kind of have to brute force it, or there's nothing really going on for that. And also the speed of it. MLB doesn't scale at all. It doesn't get enough card advantage, and it also doesn't scale. And sometimes the scaling actually does matter for some decks. Speaking of which, let's talk about Luard a bit, and why Luard, despite having the ability to scale, just doesn't work.
All right, Shadow Paladin main. I'm going to let you talk about this mostly. I'm just going to give my 2 cents about Luard. I think Luard is a very, very strong deck. It's a very consistent deck, and it's a very good pick for tournaments, for longer tournaments. The problem with Luard is going to come down to how easy it is to play Gurgit right now. It's very, very consistent to play Gurgit. It's very, very fast, and Luard just can't deal with it.
Yep.
That's why Luard's here.
Yeah, and that's really the nutshell. The reason why Luard was able to compete beforehand was, especially when it went first, Once Upon a Time was a format, right? This was when the clan collection started rolling around, where your turn 4 was a hyper impactful thing, right? And Luard had a really big turn 4, but it needed to get there. And that was dangerous because the deck did not have a lot of hand advantage and would rely on decremps in order to use your front row for intercepting. Like, the fact that those 10k intercepts were unironically one of your best forms of defense just goes to show that it's a bit of a glass cannon, admittedly. So that's not going to cut it when this will burst you before you even have the chance to build up more than like 2 force markers, right? That's just pitiful. 2 force markers is pretty standard for a lot of stuff. However, there is another thing about Shadow Paladins, which is the Revenger archetype. Now, the Revenger archetype honestly sometimes feels better than Luard in some ways because it actually can go quicker. Orchard Phantom can get you a bunch of force markers right off the bat, whereas Luard, like you can get 3 in 1 turn, which is really easy, and you can go from there, but the 3rd one's during the end phase. Whereas Mordred can get you your cake and eat it too. You can still have a pretty decent offense. But even beyond that, just the Raging Form 7 attack combo, if you can somehow live and go for Raging Form 7 attack and you high roll, it does have the potential to be able to burst through, and so that might be better than Luard, but people do take Luard a bit over that, and neither of them are very good because one is too slow but very consistent, and the other one is definitely fast enough, but not only can you play around the limit break and just 3 to 6 them, but it's not guaranteed that the RFD is going to be able to get the job done, especially if you low roll on your triggers, because you kind of need to kill that turn because you burn so much resources. Sure, you build enough hand, but it's not going to be good enough because you put yourself at high damage to do it. So neither of them really come out on top there. It is a very consistent clan. It's a clan that doesn't have like a win condition that's in line with defeating a very strong Excel deck.
Yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention earlier about Revengers, I thought I'd mention it since it's one of your favorite decks. Revengers did actually top a BSF Houston.
Yep.
So if you ever want to check that out, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, that was the Raging Fall version, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, Raging Fall makes sense because the Raging Fall, it really just epitomizes what you have to do with this clan, which is like hit high and then just like sack the crits, because those are like high crit counts. Those are like over 8 crits, man. OTT. We need to talk about it.
I guess I'll talk about this since this is one of my favorite clans. So OTT really lacks a super strong win condition. Battle Sisters is your best version of the deck, and where the deck is super good at getting early game card advantage, so it can live against Excel decks. It shares the same numbers as Excel, which is kind of an issue, but you know, the 12k base. But the other problem with OTT is that OTT just doesn't have that strong win con to like close games out. So even if you can live a while, like you're just prolonging the inevitable. Even Battle Sisters, which Batsis has the strongest win con of all of the OTT decks. It's not good enough. Like even with the card restrict, like you have to try and take it to the late game. It's just too slow of a deck.
Right, and one thing to note about OTT as a clan is its only form of multi-attack is yo-yo, and that's not very good. That's not very nice. Yeah, like multi-attack is kind of a staple. I mean, when the mechanic of Excel is inherently a multi-attack on its own and everything else is trying its best to multi, like Raging Form is like down here, and that thing could get up to 7 attacks. This is a 3-attack clan unless you play the witches, which are not very good. That should say everything about why it's down here. It just can't close games. You can have a bajillion cards if you want. If you can't close games, it doesn't matter. And when we talk about Bermuda way later, you know, when you can close games and also farm a big hand, you know, that's what gets you good. So that's enough on OTT though. They didn't really need a lot of talking about. Okay, Genesis is me. I'm going to talk about Genesis a bit. So one of my favorite clans, right? The thing about Genesis is it's probably one of the most weird placements on this entire tier list for 2 reasons. One, it's a deck that has a lot of potentially rogue strategies there, but you know, all of them are kind of like vying against each other. And the other bit is it actually does have a theoretical hard counter to decks like Gurgit, which are very very big board spam Excel decks, but that hard counter hasn't really come to prominence. I'm talking about Melissa with Fenrir. So for those of you guys who don't know, Witch of Frogs Melissa is a card which forces your opponent to call from the top of their deck over their units, right? Over the circles. So this is a mill strategy potentially, because let's say your opponent has 7 or 8 circles, right? And you do Melissa 3 times. 8 times 3 is 24 cards from their deck. That's really savage, right? And they don't even get the auto skills from the call. So this is a very sacky way to win alternatively, and it was doing pretty good for the time as a rogue tier deck. But the issue with Melissa is that it preyed on players who did not know about this win condition. When people wisened up and thought to look out for the Melissa Mill, they started to play around it. And it's already hard enough to line up Melissa Mill. It's even harder when you have to line up a shot against a moving target. So that's why it's really fallen off in recent times. And there's other Genesis strategies which might have potential, such as Astral Poets, which are a very high octane not tier 3, turn 3 OTK deck potentially, but of course it's very high roll, right? It's inconsistent, whereas you can have some stronger tier 3s that are consistent. That's what keeps it back. And Hemi goes in a similar category there. So you have a lot of stuff that could have done a bit better, but none of them are able to really cut it by comparison. And Fenrir is the best that they had because it is the most consistent deck, and it does have the really good win condition. But even then, if they play around the win condition, Fenrir is just a very bog standard deck. It was one of the okay G-boot decks ever. So Genesis is in a weird place where it has a lot of potential, but none of that potential is really strong enough to shine through and compete in this format. It's a really good proponent of why the cutoff here is not good enough for meta and good enough for meta.
Yep.
Yeah, that's that. Angel Feathers. So this one's actually going here, and this is a really weird one to talk about. We're both Angel dudes, so I guess we could both like take a stab at it, but I mean, we could just say it out loud. It's Malkuth.
Yep. It is 100% Malkuth. Malkuth did get some tops this Springfest, surprisingly. I kind of not sure how, to be honest, because Malkuth's not really fast enough to deal with Gurga.
Because they have excellent dedicated pilots, man.
Yeah, that's really what it's got to be. But I think Malkuth could be a really good deck at the format. Kind of slows down a little bit, and the less, and you'll notice, and Josh, you brought this up earlier. A lot of the top decks actually don't have a lot of board control except for Thavas. So, spoiler, except for Thavas, right? So,
what a surprise there!
You can actually keep your rear guards, which is, obviously that's a really good thing for Angels, but for Malkuth specifically. But Malkuth in general, I think, is a really, really strong strategy. This format is just too fast for it, and if it wasn't for how fast this format was, I really think it'd be doing a lot better.
Right. And one of the other decks that does technically have field removal, like MLB here, because they do run the blasters, and CB is so free in that deck that you can really just counterblast for the frick you want. Like, you can counterblast for a Blaster Dark and it's a good move. But the issue is that Malkuth also has the ability to stop retires. Like, anything that's on a Protect 2 won't get retired anyway. So even with things like Thavas and MLB, their kind of removal just isn't going to stop Malkuth. But the issue is that you just have to get there long enough. Malkuth can get some pretty big numbers, and its real win condition is a Sentinel Restrict. But the issue that Sentinel Restrict is that it lacks critical pressure. And its numbers are pretty big, but you're only getting 2 attacks with it. Like, this is a 3 attack deck. And if you're wondering why we're not talking about the other Angels decks, it's because they don't matter. No other Angels deck is doing anything. Gabriel got irrevocably neutered way long ago when lost Hamiel. Celestials are way too complicated for middling rewards, so Celestials aren't really doing anything, and the Ramiel reverse is not a worthy win condition whatsoever. And Kiriel was trying to be like Malkuth but aggressive, but it just fails at its job. It's just not good enough for what it does, right? Like, you can get some like pretty decent attacks, but because it's requiring you to do Protect 2s and keep recalling for basic attacks, it's not doing anything that most other decks can't do in a nutshell, right? So nothing about Angel Feathers really stands out at all, aside from Malkuth theme, but then it's only barely. Which is why, yeah, it's got a pretty good thing going for it, and I think that if it wasn't for Gurga making everything really, really, really fast, then Angels might actually have a more mid-range game plan that could really play to your advantage. But without that, that's it. That's all you got. So that sucks. But it doesn't suck as hard as Kagero. Because Kagero literally has nothing, dude. Holy crap.
Yeah, Kagero's problem, and I think this is a big problem, is that Kagero can't farm card advantage. It's not like the good old days of G where you actually had like good card advantage cards and retiring your opponent's rear guards actually meant something. It's just retiring is just not good enough anymore. You need to be able to draw cards and retire and create multi-attacks. And Kagero is a very fair clan in V. It doesn't do anything unfair, and that's why it's probably always not gonna be a super competitively viable strategy. I do think the Rebirth is a very cool, very good deck. It's just not doing anything inherently unfair, and that's exactly why I just don't think it'll ever be a meta competent deck.
Right. And one very crippling issue for Kagero as well, and it's the one that I think a lot of people in the community complain about the most, its rear guards suck eggs. Like, there is not enough of a foundation for support to make Kagero work. It's a Vanguard club. And when I say Vanguard, I mean specifically Vanguard units club. Like, your Vanguard unit is the only thing that really matters in your deck, right? Whether it's Lawkeeper, Dauntless, any of the Overlords, take your pick. That's really all your deck has going for it. Aside from that, you're just running very basic stuff that's minuscule, right? Like Break Breath, retire and draw. Like, that's it. Like, you want to know what else is removes itself for a draw? Shiranui. But it does like 3 other things in addition to that, 4 if you include the Superior Ride. And that's a rear guard, right? And Nubatama is also not a very good clan. But it just really goes to show that as we build this list, Kagero's going to just be way back here, dude. Like, I just need to make it perfectly clear. I think Megacolony is a better clan than Kagero. Just because it has a better bulwark of support.
Yep.
Like, that's how bad this is. So really sad days for Kagero, man. Nothing to do it. And I mean, it just goes to show, if Overlord can't do anything, then what is this supposed to do, right? You know, if you wanted the old days of Blade Master Loop and Premium before that got like banned to high heaven through a rule change, you know, so be it. But in V, it's just sad days forevermore. Narukami. So this one is a bit of an enigma, if we're being real here. Like, I think I'm gonna put this sucker like right around here. So Narukami is the best clan that doesn't do anything.
You know, every time I look at a brand new format for V, I'm just like, oh, this is it. This is when Vanquisher is gonna be.
Oh man, it's time to hit full Bronto.
Yeah, no, it's 2Ps reliant. It's a good Excel deck, but like, why play this Excel deck when you can play the infinitely more consistent ones? And then, you know, I'll let you explain Armor Break. I think that Armor Break's a great counter to Excel decks, but if you see Narukami across the table in this format, you know they're playing Armor Break, so you're fully aware.
Yeah, right. Just to briefly explain Armor Break, which, by the way, if you want to know more about the history of that card, then look up the Narukami Top 10 video that I released a few months back. Anyway, so Armor Break Dragon is a grade 3, and what it does is on the Vanguard circle, you're able to counterblast 3, and you bind the opponent's front row, their entire front row, so yes, Excel hate already, but then it gets 10,000 power and critical +2, no, I did not stutter, +2 critical for every single open front row circle that your opponent possesses, which does include Excel markers. Furthermore, if you have 4 or more damage, then it gains an additional 10,000 power, and it also gets a Sentinel Restrict. That's if you're on Limit Break, right? Which you're probably going to have to be if you're going to Counterblast 3 anyway. So if they put you to high damage and you live, Armor Break theoretically is going to get really high numbers. We're talking about 50, 60, 70 plus numbers with enough criticals to kill them even they hit several 6 damage heals. And it would be a one-shot kill theoretically. The thing is that this isn't good enough. And the reason why it's not good enough is, wouldn't you have guessed it, it's really easy to see coming. Everyone who's playing Excel already knows that Armor Break is a thing, so they're either A, not going to give you enough counterblast, or B, farm up enough hand to deal with Armor Break. And once you Armor Break, that's it. That single Vanguard attack is it. You've used up all your counterblast for it. You don't have any multi-attack for your Vanguard, nothing. If they sufficiently block that, right, you're done. So aside from that one trick, it's very similar to Melissa, where it used to be really devastating when people didn't understand what was coming. But now that they know what's coming, especially because this is a time capsule format, so it's not like new things are really changing. Sure, they have those like count as heal for G guards kind of things that are coming into V series, but those are not impactful, not the way ride fixers work. So aside from that one trick, Narukami doesn't really do anything. And one final point before we move on to Nubas. Narukami is suffering from an issue because its two best decks, which are Eradicators and Vanquisher, suffer a catch-22 situation, where Vanquisher actually does have the numbers to hit over defensives, but it's way too piece reliant. Eradicators are actually more consistent in building a pretty decent board because they have several searchers for themselves, but Eradicators die to a single defensive. Vowing Saber Reverse is way too fragile of a card for its board restand because it doesn't substantiate it with too much power, right? So one defensive will basically turn down your turn, unless of course you're trying to run Martial Arts Dragon, but even then that's not good enough. So yeah, like you can't have one or the other, whereas with Gurgit, you do get to have both, and way more consistent at that. So go figure. That's what it is.
That's exactly what all the other good Excel decks will have, as you'll find out, is the other good Excel decks kind of get to get their cake and eat it too. You don't have a card like Stunverse that or Exterminate that really helps Eradicators hit those numbers here, so Eradicators is just going to fall short offensively.
So sad. But to reuse my transition from earlier, not as sad as Nubatama. So it's better than Kagero though. Is Nuba better than OTT?
I would play Nuba over OTT.
You would? Yeah, okay. Because Battle Sister, it's still a 3-attack clan, right? Like Nubas are weird, right? Because Nubas are potentially a really dangerous clan if you don't know what to look out for, because they have several rearguard win conditions. I hate to do this plug again, Mizukaze. I hate to do this plug again, but if you want to learn more about those, I did just make a Nuba top 10 list talking about that. But in addition to Mizukaze, right, Kokuchiyoashi's banned, unfortunately, but they also have like Fuzen Kongo that they could do. That's another one if you're at the ultimate break. So it has a lot of really neat tricks at its disposal, but they're just tricks. They don't have Vanguards that really kill at all aside from that. So all you have to do is be aware of the rearguard win conditions, and there you go. You just fend off some pretty lackluster attacks. Nubatama has a really hard time hitting big numbers.
Yep. I think Shiranui's got some really cool tricks. I think being able to control the board state's cool, but unfortunately control doesn't go very far when Gurgit can just call off the top 5.
Yep, exactly. And that's really all that has to be said about that, right? Nuba just doesn't do anything too exceptional. It has cool tricks, but you see, if it had those X factors in addition to hitting really hard, then we would have been somewhere, but it doesn't. So again, we're having to trade off one good thing for another good thing, whereas the better decks don't do that trade-off. So that's where like it differs. So Murakumo's a bit of a weird one. This one would probably be really at the bottom of like the not good enough because Yasuie. It's actually a G-boot deck that's surprisingly sticky in this format.
Yeah, Yasuie just kind of it hits the toolbox nature that you want to see. You can kind of see basically everything in your deck. You have a lot of tools available to you in Murakumo. If you want to play Shirayuki in certain variations, then you could, and Shirayuki's obviously a really powerful card. But Murakumo's really going to fall short because it's an Excel deck kind of similar to Narukami that doesn't do anything particularly unfair. Doesn't hit those really big numbers. It's very consistent, but it's not going to hit over defenses. It doesn't get to farm a ton of card advantage. It can do some cool stuff, like I really like the Lady Silhouette combo with Fright Sickle, but like realistically it's not doing enough unfair things to put it any higher. I'd honestly say you could probably put it at the top of not viable, or at the bottom of just not good enough. I think that it could be better if the format was a little less unfair, but maybe not.
Yeah, like I think the reason why I'm going to put it at the bottom here is just like it is with Malkuth for Angel Feathers, the Saving Grace, where it's like, okay, yeah, there's some players pushing that. Yasui does tend to get pushed by some dedicated players, and like when we look at Murakumo, we can immediately say, Yasui. But when we look at like these three, it's like, oh yeah, so what deck's actually like potentially viable? I don't think of anything for these three, but we can at least think of one for freaking Muras there, which is why they're going to just barely nudge up. But like again, it's like David said, if you feel like it belongs down these and down here, we would not fault you for it, because Dragon Empire just It's not very good in general. In V, it did not pan out very well ultimately, so that's kind of sad. Case in point, not as bad as Kagero because of Ancient Dragons, but still really bad.
I would definitely put Tachi over OTT.
Fair. Okay. Yeah, honestly, I would probably also this or Nubas though, because like Tachis actually do have like a kind of an aggressive turn dependent, you know.
It's a little high roll sometimes, especially like if you're playing true Ancient Dragons, but it's very high octane. It's kind of similar to Murakumo, but a little more high roll, less consistent. If you pop off, man, it's pretty fucking crazy.
Hitting that Spino reverse, bro.
Right, it's pretty crazy, but realistically, I think it's too inconsistent or just too janky to like really keep up in a competitive atmosphere or for like a tournament play. But I honestly don't think Tachi's is a bad deck. It's just missing something to make it unfair, and it's not there.
Yeah, because it's ultimately the thing about Tachis is they're the decks that are pretty like consistent and stable, relatively speaking, because it's a naturally unstable clan. But the things that are consistent, like Gaia, like all it does is bludgeoning, right? But then you have something like Ancient Dragons, where they actually do have that wicked front trigger extra crit kind of thing that makes this really sick offense. But you have to line everything up, and your opponent's just sitting there and looking that, and they're like, okay, so the key here is to stay at 3 damage and then just go from there, right? So it's not that threatening overall. What Tachi's needs is a best of both worlds, and I kind of hoped that Raptor Kernel could have done that for them, where that really big restanding Vanguard that also facilitates extra multis might also have been consistent enough of a really big bludgeoning to like do something, because restanding Vanguards are pretty strong, right? That has always been the case, but it was still too janky, right? So overall, it's got potential, but it's just too janky. More janky than some of these guys up here even, right? Like the only reason like these guys are down here and not up here is because of this thing. That's the sad part. Like again, that's why we started with Gurgit, because it's really making the pretty good decks just not good enough. Oh man, and who better to bring up that sentiment, right, than Dark Irregular? Take it away, my man. Take it away. This is you.
Yeah, Dark Irregular is my clan. I play a lot of DI, and I play a lot of V. I've played a lot of Premium and a lot of GDI. I'll tell you that this version of DI is the most unfair DI has been. Except for maybe like early Premium NLK, right?
With NLK.
That's still Daimonos, right? But like, realistically, I think DI's win condition is super fucking unfair. You have two different just stupid win conditions in Gusteel and Hope on Dam. And even Shahrat can make multis, which is something OTT can't do. But
right. Tell them more about the difference between these tiers.
Yeah, right. But like realistically, DI it can sack really hard and like get its pop off on turn 4, but if it misses the pop off on turn 4, it's not fast enough. Like but on the flip side of that, if it was consistent at doing the turn 4 pop off, we'd be looking at a different tier list, and I think that would be a worse one.
Oh
right?
yeah.
So
like between Ezel meta and Daimonos meta, I would have taken Ezel over Daimonos.
Yeah. It's kind of so that's just kind of what you're looking at, man. Like I think that NLK is really, or not NLK, but DI is really just.
I mean, what's the difference?
NLK
you ask.
But DI as a whole, I think, is a really unfair deck, but it's just not consistent enough at doing its pop off fast enough to win against Gurgit. If Gurgit was, a little more tame, I think DI would see more results, just like it was before Gurgit became back into the meta. We were seeing a lot of Shahrat Amon lists doing pretty well, but the format's just too fast for it right now.
Right. Back when it was tier 4, well, I'm not a turn 4 format. I made that same mistake. Turn 4 format. This was a turn 4 like no other. Like I would be sweating bullets. Like, Is it Castile? Is it damp? Is it both? Because you
Is
can
it
do
both?
both. And I mean, like, freaking, like, man, freaking, I remember one of my Juan, right? He was bringing freaking 10 draw Amon, and just because I had a Castile in there, it was throwing down way harder. Like, heck, dude, he beat some really top dog decks with that. It just goes to show that you can be really strong, but if DI saw the pieces and he could make it to turn 4, it kind of just says no to whatever it is that you're doing, right? It just, its ramp just hits a boiling point where it just shoots into the stratosphere, right? But we don't let it shoot into the stratosphere these days, which is why it's good, but not good enough. Okay. Hell, Moon. It's better than OTT and Kagero, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's probably right around the same level as Tachi.
Yeah,
Piece reliant, multi-attack. If it gets its pop-off, specifically Silverthorns. If it gets its pop-off, then it's really strong. Like, Hari's too straightforward. And although Hari did get a top. Hari did top.
Yeah, look at that, right?
Yeah,
it happens. Those G-boot decks, bro.
But like I said, man, it's kind of like Tachi. If it high rolls, it hits really hard. Very cool, very explosive. It's not always going to do that, and honestly, I think it hits lower numbers than Tachi. So
yeah, right. It's like, and again, you go back to that whole stability versus like explosive power thing. Spikes are also not very good, but I do like Rising Nova shenanigans. Admittedly, did Nova hit any tops recently? I don't think he did. Did he? Nope. Yeah, I'm gonna put them right side by side with Nubatama because I feel like they hit the very similar space of, combine a couple of units together for this really wicked combo play and see if that does it, right? And if your opponent is smart, it doesn't do it. But it is kind of funny running into these like fringe dudes in tournament play, and if you're just starting out tournament play, they will actually wreck your crap, and it's a learning experience, right? You change as a person once you get hit with the Mizukaze, or if you get Rising Nova with like Dudley formation, like Dudley reverse, and get the whole 7 drive restand bullcrap. It's different. Gear Chronicle though, I mean, this clan is all Chrono Dragon next stage, dude. And like Steam Maidens just got wiped off the face of the earth. Like, not too long ago, it used to be here, but then now it's here, and it's like, I mean, Chrono Dragon next stage, it feels like one of those. It is a nice consistent multi attack, but like that's about it. Like,
it's early G-boot. Early G-boot was actually fair in comparison to late G-boot. So.
Right. Like, you look at Messiah, right? And then Messiah compared to what Gavriel and Gurgit and stuff would become, it's like, oh yeah, that's a good Dark Horse deck.
Yeah, I think that I still seen some people trying to make Steam Maidens work, but that's the most I've seen from Gear Chronicle, and I still don't know how you even make Steam Maidens work anymore. So I think that Gears is in a rough spot for me.
Right. Gears is just problematic, man. And also, like, we have to mention that with Gears, it's naturally a really difficult deck to play because your deck ratios are so wonky, right? So compared to the other 23 clans, you especially suffer inconsistency issues where sometimes your biggest enemy is not your opponent, it's yourself. It's your own freaking deck just falling apart. Like, just imagine a clock you put together and then it just falls to pieces. All the gears are flying everywhere, right? Like, it's a very apt example because that's kind of what Gears feels like. And now when things do go well for you, you're not doing anything out of the ordinary. So that's when it just suddenly became not worth it. I'm gonna keep making this transition. Speaking of not worth it, man, like, holy crap, dude. What does Nova's do? I guess freaking Victor, right?
Victor.
Yeah,
it's only Victor. Like, realistically, I don't think you play Nova unless you're playing Victor. And Novas just don't build up a whole lot of card advantage. They're pretty piece reliant. You better hope that Victor sees what he needs to see off his top 7, and then hopefully, if you see all your pieces, it's a really cool explosive turn. But even its explosive turn, I don't really think his explosive turn is anywhere close to what regular Excel decks do. So not only is Nova's kind of slightly inconsistent, they can't build a ton of card advantage, their ceiling's also just not as high. I think Nova's got really fucked over in V.
Oh yeah, also if you ever fight against a field control deck, it's the most devastating thing ever, right? Like, imagine Nova's having to fight against Narukami. It's not pretty. And also, speaking of win conditions, right? We're talking about win conditions like with Dose Sledge, right? It's cute, it's cute. But you want to talk about win condition.
Right.
Damp Shaharo, right? Now that's a win condition, bye. So Dimension Police.
I think Dimension Police isn't terrible. I think it's probably like towards the top of not viable.
Right.
I think that the whole Brad Black Enigman thing is really cool. I think you can do some really powerful plays, and if your opponent doesn't know what they're playing against, like DP can just like wildly like hit these massive numbers, and your opponent's like, oh shit, I didn't know your deck could do that, and then they die, right? But like, most players that played at least premium understand what DP's trying to do.
Right. DP is oddly deceptive that way. And it's kind of funny because depending on the version you're playing, like if you're playing more of the power reduction stuff like Zeal, which is fairly legitimate, interestingly enough, right? You can be a goofball like me and forget to actually place your force markers. And still win that, and still potentially win that fight, right? Like that's how big DP gets. It just inherently outscales its own markers, but DP doesn't do anything right now because there's nothing unfair about the clan. The issue with DP is it's a glass cannon, right? It's a glass cannon in the same way that Shadow Paladins are kind of a glass cannon, but it doesn't farm up the same amount of hand as Shadow Paladins, and it doesn't search out its pieces the way Shadow Paladins do. It does have pretty good searchability for grade 3s and stuff, but as anyone who plays this clan can tell you, just because the Die Kaiser is on field to punish the Sentinel doesn't mean that you actually drive check the grade 3s to punish that Sentinel. And just because you're playing Brad Black doesn't mean you actually hit a good ride off the top 7. And even if you do hit a good ride, it's like, congratulations, right? It still doesn't scale to even some of the decently strong stuff like Narukami, right? So that's why it's not really viable right now. But what I must say that Enigman Storm is kind of a scary like deck with Brad Black. So if we had ever gotten theoretically like more Enigmans, I felt like you might have had something there. I felt like it might have been like around Murakumo's level of you could take it to like fringe play and actually like see a top here and there. So it would have been kind of cool that way. But that actually is where Blink Joker's at. It saw some tops, right? It's kind of like Angel Feather.
Yeah, you got two different versions of Link Joker to look at here. You got the Chaos Messiah list that is seeing competitive success. It's just, it's kind of taking like the aspects of what's good about both archetypes and just kind of throwing it together. Messiah's got the aggro portion. Chaos is going to give you some control against Excel decks theoretically. The problem is, and this is kind of going to go for a lot of control decks in general, is that Gurgit doesn't give a shit if you retire its rear guards, lock its rear guards, take its Excel markers. It doesn't really matter because it can just get more. And yeah, Gurgit's just kind of like unfair in that sense. I think that Chaos Messiah would be a really good deck if Gurgit wasn't just so oppressive and so consistent and so strong at getting that board set up over and over and over and over and over again. That's why Narukami, I think the upside of Narukami is the board control. Doesn't really matter against Gurgit. Same with Bermuda. Bermuda does not give a fuck about Chaos.
Right, and that's a good transition too. Because if you guys have noticed, this has been a very bottom-heavy list. It's about to change.
Oh, I also forgot to mention Glendios, but I don't know if you want to talk about Glendios.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, let me talk a little bit about Glendios. So, guys, Glendios actually a pretty strong deck. It can like V-lock the opponent really, really easily, and also it does have a lot of searchability. It is possibly the most consistent of all the Link Joker decks because a lot of the Starvaders and reverses, you search out a lot of your pieces really good. And also Glendios, just because locks are pretty strong, right? You could lock out your opponent with a V-lock, but Glendios does have a really big weakness, which is Excels. It can't lock things on Excel markers, nor can it get rid of Excel markers. And with Excel markers, even if you do lock their normal front rows, they can just attack from Excels anyway. So when your biggest weakness is against a mechanic which dominates this format, it's going to keep you pretty low. Like, I think Ledios in particular really embodies the good but not good enough, because it is a really strong strategy, just not for this format. Just as MMOB is not necessarily the strongest strategy, but it happens to really shine in this format. So that's why the dichotomy is present, where this is here and that is there. But talking about Bermuda now, if there was a deck that I would take to tourney that wasn't Gurgit, it would be Bermuda.
Yes, Bermuda has the best card pool in V. I think it's got the best rear guards in V series, and I think its boss units are really strong. The only thing that really sets Gurgit apart is Gurgit's ceiling is higher. But realistically, if Gurgit was even slightly worse, I think that Anj would be a fucking menace. Mostly off of the back of their new ride fixer, Germain. Germain allows you to bounce back Tiroa to your hand and recall it. This allowing you to basically reset your Tiroas, allowing you to get many attacks on multiple force markers. It's pretty unfair, and Bermuda is really good at farming early card advantage. You have things like Aqua Lease a lot, but a lot of them aren't even necessarily doing that anymore. But you have things like you have big shields like what's her name, Nikita?
Soul Blast 3 for 25k shield that also draws really nice. I played that a lot in the duos.
Yeah. So like you have a lot of options to get shield. You have a lot of like Ellie too, right? So you have like these really strong like defensive options, but you also have just a lot of ways to draw cards, build up a farm hand advantage. So even if Gurgit does pop off, you can actually guard that and you can kind of clap back. And that's exactly why I think Bermuda is probably like your best pick to play against Gurgit. Now, I want to preface this and say Gurgit got over 50 tops in the BSF season. I think Anj got like 16.
Right. Like, it's second best, but the margin between the top and the second top is so wide that we made a whole other tier. Right.
Yes.
Like that just says everything on its own. And one other thing to mention about Bermuda is just to really explain what a Bermuda turn looks like, because you were talking about it a bit, but you would be with Germain, you'll be attacking with Tiroa like 3 to 4 times, right? And usually 4 times, because Tiroa is a restanding rear guard. This is a force clan. And that means with the Force Clan, you can either get big Force 1s for a lot of extra damage, or you could try to go for the Force 2 for criticals, right? You could do either or, because Tiroa also inherently gets a power buff in of herself with her skill. So it's really strong. That's the thing. It has big hand, big win condition, so much consistency, and even really janky crap that you could throw in just to sack with. Like there's this Pearl Sisters. And if you hit your sisters, right? I mean, those are both I think 28k with an extra crit attackers, that just for free constantly, as long as you see both of them.
And it's Anj in particular is a 4-stack deck. So Astero is especially powerful in Anj because you can literally spam force markers onto one circle, make that Tiro extra massive, and then swing 4 times.
It's just one of the strongest clans consistently throughout this game's history, right? Like, you brought up Ellie, and like there was a point where they had banned Ellie even, and for good reason, because Ellie was just so much shield for Vert, right? This clan will always be like one of the strongest, basically, just thinking about it in the hindsight, and it just, in this time capsule, it ultimately did end up as one of the best, as it honestly should have. Granblue. So, like I said, we're gonna start rounding out the second tier here. It's been really emaciated, but that's because Maglanica and Zoo has a lot to say about that. So Granblue, another one of your clans, funnily enough. So do talk about this. Time to talk about Night Rose.
Yeah, so Night Rose is I wouldn't personally take Night Rose into an Excel heavy meta, but Night Rose is extremely consistent, and I think just like Luard, very consistent. But the difference between Night Rose and Luard is Night Rose can farm hand advantage, and Night Rose hits like a fucking truck.
And now talk about its ride fixer, which just like with Gurgit and Bermuda also changes the game plan.
Oh my god. So Frange allows you to play with just one Skull Dragon, which is pretty nuts. You used to need to see like both to do like the big 4 attack combo. Now you can do a 3 Skull Dragon turn with just one. Because essentially, like if you have one on board that you called off like Negerbone or something, right? You swing with that, it retires itself. You swing with the Frange with a booster, you call back that Skull Dragon, you swing with Skull Dragon again. So that's Skull Dragon number 2. And then you swing with Ange, you call out the Beatrice call, and you call out the Beatrice and the Skull. You don't even really need to see Beatrice for this combo anymore, so you don't even need to see the Beatrice. You literally just have to see Frange and 1 Skull Dragon, and you get 3 Skull Dragon swings. Like it's ridiculous. The thing is like it's so consistent because you have so much deck filtering and milling. You have Greed Shade, you have Columbard. You just kind of see everything in your. You can see everything in your deck. Right. Navigator's there to help make that win condition even dumber, even faster. So I think Granblue can just play really, really fast. And it can see everything it needs to see. It can farm card advantage. That's exactly why it's here, is because it's super, super, super consistent.
Right, and it's kind of neat that these 3 are the top 3 because there's like a few parallels here that are like interesting to know. 3 of the best search abilities ever, right? Search off deck, draw, and dump. Right, you know, the way of seeing your cards. Furthermore, best excel ever, best force ever, best protect ever.
Yep.
Kind of interesting how that trifecta worked out, but it really did work out that way. And like Granblue, much like Bermuda, has one of the best foundations ever, right? You already talked about a lot of the gangbuster units. We got Columbard, Greed Shade, Negerbone, Navigator if you want to take Navigator builds. There's Beatrice, which is also another generic. One that we didn't bring up yet, but is really good because this helps with like farming up hand, a Ghost Ship. You can spam Ghost Ships if you want to keep getting hand, and it's still a really decent beater, right? It was on a Night Rose. It's a 29k beater, which is really good. That's just all to say that Granblue has literally everything you would ever need. If you want counter charges, you got things like Cutlass and King Serpent. If you want to like utilize your soul for other stuff, you got plenty of ways to utilize your soul. There's just nothing that Granblue can't do at this point. And because the dumping is so easy and just searchable, you can do it. You can just do it.
That's a lot of what makes Granblue really good in premium as well. Is simply just having access to literally anything in your deck. Just allows you to make these monstrous decks that can toolbox just about anything, specifically Hanali. But like, yeah, no, it's the same thing in V. You can just toolbox any. You can play one ofs. It's fine. Just call it out of your drop.
Yeah. And to put it in perspective, this is one of the reasons why MLB is a little bit dubious, because yeah, it's, you know, it's good against like some excels, but when it runs into like this really big bludgeoning or this really big bludgeoning, that 18k means nothing, dude, right? Yep. So it's like, yeah, you're very matchup dependent, so it's a very flimsy counter. So we got Aqua Force. It's kind of funny how this lined up, right? You know, Bermuda, then Granblue, then Aqua Force. Aqua Force. So I'll go ahead and talk about Aqua Force a bit, right? Aqua Force is really sitting on the back of 1 1/4 decks. So the number 1 deck that it's sitting on is Thavas, and Thavas is basically another one of the premier Excel decks. Excel Hell was really founded on the faces of a few of the strongest Excel decks ever, particularly the G-Boot Excel decks, right? So you're talking about Gurgit, you're talking about Vanquisher, and you're also talking about Thavas. Thavas can generate multiple markers, although it does a little bit slower because of the rewrites. Thavas has a lot of extra attacking and pretty good attacking with columns, thanks to things like your own, you can use your Ride Fixer, which is a restand on 4th battle or more with 10k power. You have Malrose, of course. But then the really big thing about Thavas and Excel deck is, in addition to having pretty good consistency and, you know, good numbers and just being able to generate extra excels, it has good draw power. It has a good ability to build up hand, and that's because of 2 key pieces, Coral Assault and Pursuit Assault, most particularly Pursuit Assault, right? For anyone who is playing V during the later its Twilight years, everyone will talk about Pursuit Assault and how we were complaining, waiting forever for Lampros to get Pursuit Assault finally. Because with that, you would actually be able to get the rest necessary to proc Thavas scale, and you would also be able to get the extra draws to see pieces. Narissa is another really strong draw card that's worth mentioning here. So when you're talking about a well-balanced strategy that has a pretty strong win condition, with this one it's just like attacking a whole bunch and overwhelming the opponent. It is an Excel deck which is inherently strong. It is pretty gosh darn consistent. Your ride is from the deck thanks to Thavas, right? As long as you see Thavas, you see Lampros all the freaking time. Nikki can also put it back, so you're not going to run out anytime soon. And it has enough hand advantage to farm up and live the early turns and just guard the poke attacks. So unlike these, which are lacking in those categories, this is not lacking in any of those categories, which is why it's one of the only Excel decks that could potentially stand up to this. But it's just because of the insanity of Gurgit's scaling and also the Ezel package, its overall speed being way greater. It does outperform Thavas, unfortunately, but Thavas does have enough to at least attempt to compete, right? That's why he's here.
Agreed.
And as for the quarter deck, real quick, Maelstrom Glory win condition is still like kind of cool, right? It's another one of those dark horses like Messiah, but it's not going to do anything. But I thought I'd bring it up because not too long ago it could have actually done something. Okay, Megacolony. So Megacolony, kind of like Nubatama. It's got a lot of neat tricks. I actually really like Megacolony's Bulwark. It's got a lot of really cool cards, right? You're talking about what's his name? Brilliant Blister. Brilliant Blister, really, really cool defensive card that I think is really nice. High Class Moth is one of the most busted countercharges I've ever seen in my life. That countercharge is absolutely, what's up?
Elite Mutant Giraffe.
Elite Mutant Giraffe, one of the best grade 2s. Armor Beater is also really good. It has a nice rearguard win condition, the form of Antlion, if you want to attempt to Antlion. But here's the issue with Megacolony. For all of its really nice support and draw power and stun effects and all that, it does not take games. It does not win, because nothing about Megacolony is all that lethal, right? Like the biggest bludgeoning tool that they have at their disposal is either attempting to like Gridora with Dark Face for like a kind of a decent number, or more preferably, they attempt to use the Giraffe Reverse. Giraffe Reverse can actually make a pretty big front row, but unless your opponent is dumb, they're not going to let you get Giraffe's restand. So what does that leave Megacolony as? For a lot of it, just a 3 to 4 attack plan, right? Which hits some decent numbers, has a little bit of stun, and just has an oddly good foundation of support. But that foundation of support means nothing if you're not actually building to a win condition that's worth a damn, right? Like these are building to a win condition that's worth a damn. This isn't, right? And that's the issue with Megacolony. If it ever got like, imagine if Giraffe Reverse actually, in addition to the front row restands and hand rip, also did get to restand anyway, right? Like that would just make it shoot up, I think. That would just be insane for this deck, but it doesn't do that. So it has to stay down here. Yep. Yeah, and that's about that. But like, just to put it into perspective against OTT, this actually does have a freaking, it does have a restand rear guard that's a little bit more generically viable, which is Intrude Scissors. But Intrude Scissors requires your opponent to read and see that, oh, if I get damaged, it'll call itself. So let's not do that, right? It's really easy to block Megacolony. So it's not doing much better than OTT. Great
nature.
All right, talk.
All right. Okay, so Great Nature has 2 different variations that are doing really well right now. What it mainly comes down to with Great Nature is very similar to Thavas or Gurgit, but it's not as stable, I'd argue, as either of those strategies. The thing that makes Great Nature really good is how fast it can ramp. Specifically, the deck that's been doing super well is Hamskay. So Hamskay is going to be relying on their clan selection, grade 3. I always forget his name because it's a really long name. But essentially, the Ride Fixer helps your Hamskay ride line be a little more consistent, see your pieces a little more often, which is pretty much all the deck really needed to do. You can get like 3 Excel markers on your first turn 3 going second. And honestly, having a good matchup going second is something a lot of V decks really don't have.
Right, you don't have proper incentive to go for it.
Yeah, but Hamskay does. And that's the thing, is Hamskay can really explode turn 3 going second, getting those 3 Excel markers, filling up your circles really, really fast, super consistent at doing it, deck thins a lot of normal units out of your deck really fast. However, if that explosion fails...
Right.
But you know what? It's very explosive. It's a very high octane deck, and honestly, it's not a bad pick. I think Leopold's a lot more stable, on the other hand, but Leopold did see less results, and I think that does just come from the fact, like, it's a really good Excel deck, just not as unfair as Gurgit.
Yeah, and one thing to also note about, because, you know, Gurgit contextualizes the whole format, right? Since Gurgit is using the Ezel Ride package, that means that even if you go first, you're basically going second anyway. So this is one of the very few decks that is both relevant and can also punish the fact that Gurgit is going to grade 3 first. That is something very important to know, and I think that in combination with it having 2 different decks that are like fairly viable is what puts it over Aquaforce, which is the more stable option, but aside from Thauvis, it's not really doing much of anything. So it's just a bit behind there. And this is barely doing something just because of Excel in general, right? So I think this is also on shaky footing compared to this, which actually does have like the balance of different strengths in order to actually stay here. And that just explains the rung from left to right. And honestly, I feel like this rung from left to right is pretty freaking solid. Like there's not really a lot that we could argue about this. Like it really just goes Golds, Bermuda, Granblue, Great Nature, Aquaforce, and then from there you just go less. Like Royals is barely up here, and then so you just have like your 2 other Paladins, and the rest is there. And Neo Nectar's not really going to change that. Neo Nectars have like Cecilia multi-attack, which for Musketeers.
And randomly gradual top ones.
Yeah, which is why I'm just gonna put it here with Pale Moon for the random hairy top.
yeah, I don't think Neo Nectar does anything unfair. It's a it's almost like a 2 fair deck. The only reason it's good in premium is because Katrina is an absolutely stupid card. But as everyone saw when Katrina wasn't around, Neo Nectar wasn't doing shit.
Yeah.
The same applies in V format. It really doesn't do anything.
And that's our list. As you can see, the difference between the haves and the have-nots is quite vast indeed. So V doesn't really end off on the best format ever, right? However, what I will say is it has a pretty robust tier 2, where if you are playing amongst these clans here, it's a very fun format to play, right? 100%. It's just that when you're talking about the competitive angle of it, it suddenly becomes an iceberg, where it's just the tippity to top that actually emerges above the water. But it is still a very fun time capsule format. And if you wanted to bring like one of these lesser decks over to the side event, go ahead, man. I think you could have a fun time. You won't beat these most likely, but it is a case where it is still a fairly fun form to play. And if you do, let's say you're just a Genesis dude playing Astral Poets and you run into, I don't know, the Yasue player, right? You can have yourselves a ball playing some beat. And even beyond the number 1 decks of each of these guys, because with these clans, we usually looked at like 1 to 2 decks that mattered. They have really fun alternative strategies. This was a fairly fleshed out format by the end here with all of its different promo support, the clan collections. It was a very fascinating format near the end. So because of that, I would say that if you guys haven't gone to V, right, and you're watching this tier list, I would recommend playing it. It's on a format that's being actively supported anymore. So pretty soon here, if it even disappears from the side event, it'll become a retro format. I'd say give it a try. It's a pretty fun one. Maybe not the most robust one ever. I personally prefer G over it, but it's still one that had a lot of fresh decks and a lot of really cool strategies to it. There was a lot of good, interesting thought put in from the Bushy team, particularly with the clan collections. It really was the second coming of this format until it wasn't. So I would recommend checking it out. Is there anything else you'd like to add on to this, David, before we call it a day?
No, I'm sorry. We talked about Gurgit a lot, but it's impossible to do a tier list about V Premium without talking about Gurgit.
Yep.
And I think that, like Josh said, I think V Premium is actually probably I hate saying this, but I think V Premium is probably the best it's ever looked. Right now, I think even as bad as this format it kind of is, like from a competitive perspective, I think this is one of the better V Premium formats. And I think honestly, if you haven't ever given a shot, give it a try. Don't take it too seriously. Take a deck that looks fun, give it a try, and don't worry about the meta too much. Realistically, I think most people are going to get really tired of playing Gurgit anyways.
Yeah, right. Like I would imagine even the Shiranui folks would like give up and go into locals with it because they've proved their point, right? They shield, right. We get it. And speaking of not worrying, you don't have to worry about OT in this format, so but that's its own discussion. That's its own discussion talking about the frickin' OT. I don't want to jump on that, man. I mean, this video is already long enough as it is. We said our piece. So if you guys did like this tier list, then go ahead and check out the other tier lists we have on this channel. We're gonna be these come up every so often, right? So don't expect it to be a super frequent thing unless I start really getting into it. But when they do pop up, then you can hit that subscribe and notification bell so that you can get the next time I do upload one of these videos, or any other Vanguard content, of which I've got a lot. We're talking anime reactions, discussions, fight nights, top 10s, the whole shebang. So check them out. And with that said, take care. God bless.